In the history of human civilization, few individuals have transformed our understanding of the universe as profoundly as Isaac Newton. Born in a small English village during a time of plague and political upheaval, this solitary genius would go on to unlock the mathematical secrets of nature itself. His discoveries in physics, mathematics, and optics laid the foundation for the scientific revolution and continue to shape our world today. This is the story of Isaac Newton, a man of extraordinary brilliance, intense dedication, and complex humanity. A difficult beginning. Isaac Newton was born on Christmas Day, 1642, in the manor house of Woolsthorpe, a tiny hamlet in Lincolnshire, England. His arrival into the world was not expected to be significant. In fact, he was not expected to survive at all. Born premature and so small that, as his mother later recalled, he could fit into a quart mug, the infant Isaac clung to life against all odds. But young Isaac's struggles extended beyond his physical frailty. His father, also named Isaac Newton, had died 3 months before his birth. The elder Newton had been an illiterate but prosperous farmer, and his untimely death left the family's future uncertain. For the first 3 years of his life, Isaac was raised by his mother, Hannah Askew Newton, in the stone manor house where he was born. Then came an event that would shape Newton's personality for the rest of his life. When Isaac was 3 years old, his mother remarried. Her new husband was Barnabas Smith, a wealthy rector from a nearby village. Smith had no desire to raise another man's child, so Hannah made a devastating choice. She left young Isaac in the care of his maternal grandmother, Marjorie Askew, and moved to her new husband's home. The abandonment cut deep. Isaac would later confess in a list of sins that he had once threatened to burn down his mother and stepfather's house with them inside it. Whether this was a childhood fantasy or an actual threat, it reveals the depth of his anger and pain. For 8 formative years, Isaac lived without his mother, developing the solitary, distrustful nature that would characterize much of his adult life. Education and early promise. When Barnabas Smith died in 1653, Hannah returned to Woolsthorpe with 3 children from her second marriage. Isaac, now 11 years old, suddenly had half-siblings, and a mother who was, in many ways, a stranger. Hannah intended for Isaac to manage the family farm and continue the Newton legacy as a farmer. But Isaac Newton was no farmer. When given tasks like watching the sheep or going to market, he would become absorbed in books or mathematical problems, neglecting his duties entirely. Stories from this period tell of Newton building elaborate sundials, water clocks, and mechanical models, including a windmill powered by a mouse running on a wheel. His mind was clearly suited for matters far beyond agriculture. Recognizing this, Isaac's uncle William Askew, who had studied at Cambridge, and the headmaster of the King's School in Grantham, where Isaac had been studying, convinced Hannah to let the boy pursue his education. In 1661, at the age of 18, Isaac Newton entered Trinity College, Cambridge, as a subsizar, a student who paid his way by performing menial tasks for wealthy students and fellows. Cambridge in the early 1660s was still teaching the ancient philosophy of Aristotle. But winds of change were blowing. Newton discovered the new mechanical philosophy of René Descartes, the astronomy of Galileo, and the mathematics of recent innovators. He began filling notebooks with his own observations and ideas, covering topics from optics to motion to the nature of matter. In his private notes, Newton asked himself fundamental questions about the universe. What is light? What is motion? What holds the cosmos together? These questions would drive his research for decades to come. He was teaching himself mathematics at an extraordinary pace, mastering in months what took most students years to learn. The miraculous years. Then, in 1665, catastrophe struck England. The bubonic plague, which had ravaged Europe periodically for centuries, returned with a vengeance. As deaths mounted in London and spread to other cities, Cambridge University closed its doors. Students and faculty fled to the countryside, hoping to escape the contagion. Newton returned to Woolsthorpe. He would remain there, largely isolated, for 18 months. These months, from 1665 to 1667, would become known as Newton's Annus Mirabilis, his year of miracles. Though alone in a farmhouse in rural England, the 23-year-old Newton embarked on one of the most productive intellectual journeys in human history. During this period, Newton made groundbreaking advances in 3 separate fields. In mathematics, he developed what he called the method of fluxions, which we now know as calculus. This revolutionary mathematical tool allowed him to calculate rates of change and areas under curves essential for understanding motion and many other natural phenomena. Unknown to Newton, German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was independently developing similar ideas, which would later lead to a bitter priority dispute. In optics, Newton conducted a series of experiments with prisms that overturned centuries of belief about the nature of light and color. The prevailing theory, dating back to Aristotle, held that white light was pure, and that colors were modifications of light caused by darkness, or some alteration. Newton proved this was wrong. He darkened his room and allowed a single beam of sunlight to pass through a prism. The beam spread into a rainbow spectrum on the opposite wall. But Newton didn't stop there. He used a second prism to recombine the colors back into white light. He also isolated single colors from the spectrum and passed them through another prism, showing they remained unchanged. His conclusion was revolutionary: white light is actually composed of all colors, and the prism doesn't create colors but separates them. But perhaps Newton's most famous insight from this period concerned gravity. The popular story, which may have some truth to it, tells of Newton sitting in his garden at Woolsthorpe when he saw an apple fall from a tree. This simple observation triggered a profound question. If gravity could make the apple fall, how far did this force extend? To the top of a mountain? To the moon? Newton began to wonder whether the same force that pulled the apple downward also kept the moon in orbit around Earth. Using his new mathematical methods, he attempted to calculate whether Earth's gravity could account for the moon's motion. His initial calculations were inconclusive, partly because the available data about Earth's size was imprecise. But the seed of universal gravitation had been planted in his mind. Returned to Cambridge and rising fame. When Cambridge reopened in 1667, Newton returned to his studies. His brilliance had not gone unnoticed. In 1669, at the remarkably young age of 26, Newton was appointed Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, one of the most prestigious positions at Cambridge. His predecessor, Isaac Barrow, had recognized Newton's genius and stepped aside to give the younger man the position. As Lucasian Professor, Newton was required to give lectures, but he was not a natural teacher. His lectures were often poorly attended. Students found his material too advanced and his presentation too dense. Newton seemed to care little about this, preferring to work alone in his rooms on his research. During the 1670s, Newton continued his optical experiments and began constructing telescopes. The standard telescopes of the time used lenses and suffered from chromatic aberration. The same effect Newton had studied with prisms caused images to be surrounded by unwanted colored fringes. Newton designed and built a reflecting telescope that used mirrors instead of lenses, eliminating this problem. Though small, Newton's telescope could magnify objects as effectively as much larger lens-based instruments. In 1672, Newton sent a description of his reflecting telescope to the Royal Society in London, England's premier scientific organization. The society was so impressed that they elected Newton as a fellow. Encouraged by this reception, Newton sent the Royal Society a paper describing his experiments and theories about light and color. The response was not what Newton had hoped. While many praised his experimental work, several natural philosophers, including the prominent Robert Hooke, criticized his theoretical conclusions. Hooke had his own theories about light and took issue with Newton's interpretation. The criticism stung Newton deeply. Newton's reaction to this criticism reveals much about his personality. He was not merely disappointed but wounded and angry. He wrote lengthy, defensive replies, and seriously considered withdrawing from all scientific communication. In one letter, he wrote that he regretted ever publishing anything, and wished to be free from the philosophical fray. This would become a pattern throughout Newton's life: brilliant work, followed by publication, criticism from others, and Newton's disproportionate reaction and retreat into isolation. The Principia, Newton's masterpiece. For years after the optical controversies, Newton withdrew from active participation in the scientific community. He continued his research in private, but published little. During this period, he became deeply interested in alchemy and theology, spending countless hours in chemical experiments and interpreting biblical texts. To many, it seemed Newton had abandoned natural philosophy entirely. Then, in 1684, came a visit that would change everything. Edmund Halley, a young astronomer and mathematician, traveled to Cambridge to consult Newton about a problem that had been puzzling the greatest minds in England. What shape would a planet's orbit be if it was governed by a force that decreased with the square of the distance from the Sun? Newton's reply was immediate: an ellipse. Halley was stunned. How did Newton know? Newton replied that he had calculated it years ago. When Halley asked to see the proof, Newton couldn't immediately find it among his papers. But he promised to rework the calculation and send it to Halley. What Newton sent Halley was far more than a simple proof. It was a short treatise containing the seeds of an entirely new science of motion. Halley recognized its significance immediately and urged Newton to expand it into a full book. Halley even offered to pay for the publication himself. For the next 18 months, Newton worked with unprecedented intensity. He barely ate, rarely slept, and often forgot to get dressed in the morning. He was consumed by his work, driven to complete what he knew would be his masterpiece. The result, published in 1687, was Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, commonly known as the Principia. The Principia is arguably the most important scientific book ever written. In it, Newton laid out his 3 laws of motion and his law of universal gravitation. The first law states that an object remains at rest or in uniform motion unless acted upon by a force. The second law gives the mathematical relationship between force, mass, and acceleration. The third law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. But the crowning achievement was the law of universal gravitation. Newton proposed that every particle of matter in the universe attracts every other particle with a force that is proportional to the product of their masses, and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. This single equation, F equals G times m1 times m2 divided by r squared, described the motion of planets, moons, comets, and projectiles on Earth with unprecedented accuracy. Using these laws and the mathematical tools he had developed, Newton explained a staggering array of phenomena. He explained why planets orbit in ellipses with the Sun at one focus, confirming Johannes Kepler's laws but now deriving them from fundamental principles. He explained the tides as being caused by the combined gravitational pull of the Moon and Sun on Earth's oceans. He calculated the shape of Earth, showing it must be slightly flattened at the poles due to its rotation. He analyzed the motion of comets, showing they too followed his laws and moved in elongated ellipses around the Sun. The Principia demonstrated that the universe operated according to mathematical laws that could be discovered through reason and observation. It marked the culmination of the scientific revolution and set the agenda for physics for the next 2 centuries. As Alexander Pope would later write in Newton's honor, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, 'Let Newton be,' and all was light." Disputes and controversies. Despite his triumph, Newton's later years were marked by bitter disputes. The most famous was with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz over who had invented calculus first. Both men had independently developed the fundamental concepts, but questions arose about who had priority and whether either had been influenced by the other's work. What began as a scholarly disagreement escalated into a nasty priority dispute that consumed both men and divided the mathematical community. Newton, who had developed his methods first but published them later, felt Leibniz had stolen his ideas. Leibniz, who had published first and developed a superior notation, felt Newton was unjustly claiming priority. The dispute became personal and ugly. Newton used his position as president of the Royal Society to appoint a committee to investigate the matter. Then secretly wrote much of the committee's report himself, naturally concluding in his own favor. Leibniz's supporters in continental Europe continued to champion their man. The bitter controversy lasted until Leibniz's death in 1716 and damaged scientific cooperation between England and the continent for generations. Newton also had a long-running feud with Robert Hooke. Hooke had claimed that he had suggested the inverse square law of gravitation to Newton, and therefore deserved credit for the theory. Newton denied owing anything significant to Hooke and worked to minimize Hooke's contributions in the Principia. After Hooke's death, Newton, as president of the Royal Society, presided over the Society's move to new quarters. Afterward, the only portrait of Hooke disappeared and was never recovered. Whether Newton was responsible remains unknown, but it was consistent with his character. These disputes reveal a less admirable side of Newton's personality. He could be petty, vindictive, and unwilling to share credit. He held grudges for years and would go to great lengths to diminish his rivals. Yet we must remember that Newton lived in an age when scientific reputation was hard-won and fiercely guarded. Priority disputes were common, and the stakes for being recognized as the originator of important ideas were high. Beyond science, alchemy, and theology, modern readers are often surprised to learn that Newton devoted as much time to alchemy and theology as he did to physics and mathematics. We tend to think of alchemy as primitive pseudoscience, but in Newton's time, the boundaries between chemistry and alchemy were not clearly drawn. Many serious natural philosophers engaged in alchemical experiments. Newton conducted countless chemical experiments in his laboratory, carefully recording his procedures and observations. He was searching for the principles that governed the transformation of matter. While he never found the philosopher's stone or discovered how to transmute lead into gold, his experimental work contributed to the early development of chemistry as a rigorous science. Newton's theological studies were even more extensive. He wrote well over 1 million words on biblical interpretation, prophecy, and church history. These writings reveal Newton as a religious nonconformist. He rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, considering it a corruption of the original Christian message. Such views were heretical and could have cost him his position at Cambridge had they become public. For Newton, there was no conflict between his scientific work and his religious beliefs. He saw his scientific discoveries as revealing God's design in creation. The mathematical perfection of the heavens testified to the wisdom and power of the Creator. Newton believed he was uncovering God's thoughts by discovering the laws of nature. Later life in London. In 1696, Newton left Cambridge for London to take up the position of Warden of the Royal Mint. Later, in 1699, he was promoted to Master of the Mint. These were not merely honorary positions. England was in the midst of a currency crisis, with widespread clipping and counterfeiting of coins. Newton threw himself into reforming the coinage with the same intensity he had once applied to physics. He personally interrogated counterfeiters, often in disguise, gathering evidence to prosecute them. Under English law at the time, counterfeiting was high treason, punishable by hanging. Newton showed no mercy to those he caught, sending numerous counterfeiters to the gallows. He oversaw the complete recoining of English currency, a massive undertaking that he managed with impressive administrative skill. In 1703, Newton was elected president of the Royal Society, a position he held until his death. He ran the society with an iron hand, dominating meetings and controlling what research was discussed and published. In 1704, he finally published his work on optics in a book called Optics. This book was more accessible than the Principia and helped establish Newton's ideas about light throughout Europe. As Newton aged, His fame only grew. He was knighted by Queen Anne in 1705, becoming Sir Isaac Newton, the first scientist to receive such an honor for scientific work. Visitors from across Europe came to meet the great man. Younger scientists sought his blessing for their work. He had become the living embodiment of the new science, the man who had revealed the clockwork mechanism of the universe. Yet even in old age, Newton remained difficult. He was imperious with those he considered his inferiors, dismissive of ideas that contradicted his own, and still quick to anger when criticized. He never married and seems to have had few close friendships. His niece, Catherine Barton, kept house for him in his later years and was one of the few people with whom he seems to have been comfortable. The final years and legacy. Isaac Newton died on March 20, 1727, at the age of 84. His final years had been troubled by various ailments, including kidney stones, which caused him considerable pain. But his mind remained sharp until near the end. Shortly before his death, he was still discussing philosophical matters with friends. Newton's funeral was a grand affair befitting a national hero. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, among England's kings, poets, and statesmen. The poet Alexander Pope composed the famous epitaph, "Nature and nature's laws lay hid in night. God said, 'Let Newton be,' and all was light." But what was Newton's true legacy? On the surface, it seems obvious. He gave us the laws of motion and universal gravitation that governed physics for over 2 centuries, until Einstein's relativity required modifications at very high speeds and strong gravitational fields. He co-invented calculus, which became the essential mathematical language of science and engineering. His work in optics laid foundations for understanding light that would later lead to quantum mechanics. Yet Newton's influence extends beyond his specific discoveries. He established a new way of doing science, combining mathematical theory with careful experimentation and systematic observation. He showed that the same laws that govern falling apples also govern the motions of planets and comets. He unified terrestrial and celestial physics, ending the Aristotelian distinction between the corrupt, changing world below the moon and the perfect, unchanging heavens above. Newton demonstrated that nature could be understood through mathematics and that this understanding could make precise, testable predictions. This was revolutionary. It meant that humans could comprehend the fundamental workings of the universe through reason and observation. We were not merely passive observers of nature's mysteries but could actively unlock its secrets. The century following Newton's death is often called the Age of Enlightenment, and Newton was its patron saint. Philosophers and scientists believed that if Newton could discover the laws governing the physical universe, perhaps similar mathematical laws governed human society, economics, and politics. While this sometimes led to naive reductionism, it also inspired systematic study of human affairs and the development of social sciences. Understanding the man. Who was Isaac Newton as a person? This question is harder to answer than what he discovered. The historical record shows us a man of contradictions. He was capable of extraordinary intellectual achievement yet petty in his personal disputes. He was deeply religious yet held heretical views he kept secret. He was a genius who transformed our understanding of nature yet also spent years in alchemical pursuits that yielded no scientific fruit. Newton's difficult childhood clearly shaped his personality. The abandonment by his mother left him with a deep need for security and control. He never married, never had children, and formed few close attachments. His relationships were often transactional rather than emotional. He seemed more comfortable with ideas than with people. Yet we must be careful not to reduce Newton to a simple psychological portrait. He lived in a different time, with different social norms and expectations. The intense competitiveness, the secretiveness, the priority disputes, these were common features of intellectual life in his era. What made Newton different was not so much his difficult personality as the magnitude of his genius. Newton himself, in a rare moment of humility near the end of his life, offered this self-assessment: "I do not know what I may appear to the world. But to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, and diverting myself in now and then." finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. This beautiful metaphor captures something essential about Newton and about science itself. Despite his monumental achievements, Newton recognized how much remained unknown. Each discovery revealed new questions. Each answer opened new horizons of ignorance. Conclusion: Isaac Newton died nearly 3 centuries ago, yet his influence remains profound. Every time we calculate a trajectory, predict a planetary position, design a bridge, or launch a spacecraft, we use the principles Newton discovered. His laws of motion and gravitation remain accurate enough for almost all practical purposes. Only when dealing with speeds approaching light or very strong gravitational fields do we need Einstein's refinements. But Newton's legacy transcends his specific laws and equations. He showed us that the universe is comprehensible, that nature follows mathematical laws we can discover and understand. He demonstrated the power of combining theory with experiment, mathematics with observation. He proved that human reason, carefully applied, could unlock nature's deepest secrets. Newton was not a perfect man. He was vain, vindictive, and often ungenerous to his rivals. He wasted years on alchemical experiments that led nowhere. He used his authority to settle scores and diminish competitors. Yet his flaws make his achievements more rather than less remarkable. He was human, with all the limitations that entails, yet he thought thoughts no human had thought before and saw truths no human had seen. In many ways, we are still living in Newton's world. We still teach his laws to physics students. We still use his calculus to solve problems. When we look up at the night sky, we still see the ordered, law-governed cosmos that Newton revealed. His specific theories may eventually be superseded by deeper explanations, but the approach he pioneered, the conviction that nature follows mathematical laws we can discover, remains at the heart of modern science. Isaac Newton, born in a farmhouse on Christmas Day 1642, premature and not expected to survive, did more than survive. He transformed human understanding of the universe. He showed us that we live not in a chaotic, mysterious world, but in a cosmos governed by elegant mathematical principles we can comprehend. In doing so, he helped create the modern world. That boy playing on the seashore found pebbles and shells that gleamed with truths that would illuminate humanity's path for centuries to come. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed learning about Isaac Newton's extraordinary life, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. The story of science is ultimately the story of remarkable individuals who dared to ask profound questions about our universe and dedicated their lives to finding answers. Newton's life reminds us that genius often comes wrapped in complexity, that the same mind capable of illuminating the heavens can be troubled by very human frailties. Yet it is the work that endures, the discoveries that light the way forward, and the questions that inspire new generations to continue the search for understanding.